Rome didn't just disband this army. Rome erased it from existence. They chiseled their names from every stone monument in the empire and condemned the memory of 5,000 soldiers to eternal oblivion. 5,000 elite soldiers, one sacred golden eagle. A whole army of the empire marched into the northern mists and vanished completely from the human story. No graves, no records. Total oblivion. Using advanced AI reconstruction, we have uncovered the physical crime scene beneath the streets of modern York. History is written by the victors, but it's edited by the paranoid. Tonight, I'm not here for Rome's glory, I'm here for its cover-up. What really happened in the freezing bogs of Caledonia? What disaster was so terrifying that Emperor Hadrian hid it from the Roman Senate, executed the memory of the dead, and built a 73-mile wall to lock the truth away? Walk through the ancient streets of York today, and you are walking over a ghost town. Touch the stones of the great Minster, and you are touching the soil where professional killers once kept watch. For centuries, Rome was a machine that consumed nations. It crushed Carthage. It enslaved Egypt. But when the empire reached the cold rivers of northern England, the machine hit a wall. The local tribes didn't surrender. They didn't bow. To control the lawless north, Rome sent its most ruthless weapon, the 9th Spanish Legion. 5,000 battle-hardened veterans who had fought across the world. They built a fortress of stone. They drew a line in the mud. But then the mists rolled in. Let's go back to where it all began. The year is 71 AD. The Roman 9th Legion pushes deep into hostile territory, chasing British tribes who refuse to submit to imperial rule. They reach a strategic point where two rivers meet, the Ouse and the Foss. And there they stop, not to rest, but to stay. They build a fortress, timber walls first, then stone. They call it Eboracum. The 9th Legion makes York their home. 5,000 men. They build bathhouses, barracks, and temples. This is not a temporary camp. This is the beginning of a capital. They trade, they build, they dominate. For decades, the 9th is the vanguard of Roman power in the north. A mobile killing machine turned civilizing engine. They drain marshes, build bridges over treacherous rivers, and clear paths through dense forests. The message to the local populace is clear. Rome is here, and Rome is permanent. But behind the grand stone walls, tension is building. Beyond the fortress lay Caledonia and Brigantia, a tactical and psychological nightmare. A landscape of perpetual mist, sucking bogs, and silent, impenetrable forests. This was a crucible forged by nature, and it was inhabited by enemies who knew its secrets intimately. The native northern tribes, the Brigantes, and the elusive Caledonians operate as masters of asymmetric warfare. They understand that direct confrontation with the disciplined, ironclad Roman legion is suicidal. Instead, they adopt a strategy of attrition. They wear the empire down through relentless, invisible harassment. They avoid the legion's main force. They strike at the flanks. They butcher the baggage trains. Every sunrise brings the fear of ambush. Every stream crossing is a potential trap. Roman military doctrine, perfected over centuries, was predicated on large formations of heavy infantry on open plains. In the narrow, winding paths of a Scottish glen, the legendary legionary phalanx becomes a slow, cumbersome target. Visibility is poor. Movement is agony. The element of surprise is permanently lost. The constant, invisible pressure takes a terrible psychological toll. The Romans were used to seeing the enemy they were fighting. Here, the enemy was everywhere and nowhere. It creates a state of pure paranoia, of exhaustion. It breaks morale. Supply lines, the lifeblood of the army, stretch thin. Long columns of baggage animals become easy prey. The campaign of conquest is slowly turning into a desperate struggle for survival. Despite the terror, the bureaucracy of Rome demands order. The soldiers continue their duty. The year is 108 AD. In the heart of Eboracum, a Roman stonemason lifts his chisel. He is completing the southeastern gate of the fortress, built in solid stone under the reign of Emperor Trajan. He carves the letters deeply into a heavy stone tablet, Legio Hispana Nona. This tablet is a declaration of permanence, capturing the legion at a moment of professional fulfillment. The soldiers who set that stone believe they are contributing to the eternal city. They believe their walls will stand forever. The stone is fixed into the gate. The gate is locked. And then the historical record goes completely dark. No subsequent records will ever mention Legio IX Hispana in Britain again. The tablet of 100 AD is their final, verifiable footprint on Earth. And York is about to learn that the mists of the north do not just hide enemies, they swallow empires. September 117 AD. In Rome, power shifts as the pragmatic Emperor Hadrian ascends the throne. But on the northern frontier of Britain, his reign begins with fire. A massive rebellion erupts, and the 9th Legion marches north along Dare Street to crush the uprising. 5,000 men, heavy infantry, and baggage trains, confident in their iron discipline. They do not know they are marching into a trap near the bogs of Fala Moor. Picture the scene, a narrow valley choked with dense fog, where visibility is reduced to meters. The Roman column stretches for miles, its heavy baggage train sinking into the mud. Suddenly, the silence is broken by the terrifying war cries of thousands of painted warriors pouring down from the hills. The tribes strike the center, cutting the long Roman line into isolated pockets of panic. Heavy iron armor, perfect for open battlefields, becomes a death sentence in the deep mud. The ground of Fala Moor turns into a slaughterhouse as commanders fall and the famous Roman formation collapses. In the center, surrounded by a dying ring of veterans, the signifer holds the aquila, the sacred golden eagle. A brutal blade strike brings him down, and the eagle sinks into the bleeding Scottish mud. The standard is captured, and the spiritual heart of the 9th Legion dies with it. When word of the annihilation reaches Rome, the imperial court faces a terrifying crisis. If the world learns that barbarians wiped out an entire elite legion, the myth of Roman invincibility will shatter. Damnatio Memoriae, the intentional erasure of memory. Imperial scribes use iron styluses to scratch out Legio IX Hispana from every active roll and tax documents. In Eboracum, the few survivors left in the rear are stripped of their unit identity and quietly dispersed among other legions. They are forbidden from speaking of the disaster under penalty of treason. Roman historians suddenly go silent, turning the death of 5,000 men into a government conspiracy. This is why the 108 AD tablet in York is so critical. It is a piece of evidence the cover-up forgot to destroy. In 120 AD, the 6th Legion marches into Eboracum to occupy the empty fort. They do not come to avenge the dead. They come to formalize a new geopolitical reality. In 122 AD, Hadrian personally visits Britain and officially stops all aggressive Roman expansion. He orders the construction of a 73-mile-long stone scar from sea to sea, Hadrian's Wall. The wall was a monument to defeat, framed as strategic foresight. It was Rome drawing a line in the mud, admitting that the wild north had won. But the story of York does not end with the lost legion. The same mist that swallowed one army will keep testing whoever tries to hold this ground next. 2 centuries later, these same stone walls will witness a moment that reshapes the entire Western world. The Viking warriors do not just sack the city. They look at the crumbling Roman walls and recognize their strategic perfection. They realize that whoever controls this fortress controls the entire water networks of northern England. Eboracum is officially renamed Jorvik, and the former Roman stronghold is reborn as the capital of a massive Norse trading empire. Viking longships, packed with silver, amber, and slaves, line the wooden docks of the river Ouse day and night. Viking families settle within the ancient walls, building narrow wooden longhouses covered in thatch and turf. Modern archaeological excavations at Coppergate in the 1970s uncovered this frozen world perfectly preserved beneath the damp soil. It is the same kind of patient digging that first put the 9th Legion's cover-up back on the map. Because the Earth lacked oxygen, scientists discovered intact leather boots, raw wood workshops, and textile fragments from 10 centuries ago. They even found the Lloyd's Bank coprolite, the largest fossilized human feces, proving Viking merchants suffered terribly from intestinal parasites. At its height, Jorvik grows to 10,000 citizens, making it a megalopolis of the dark medieval world. The city hums with industry, minting its own unique coins that blend Christian symbols with the hammer of Thor. But Norse rule is unstable and violent, written in a cycle of sudden betrayals, executions, and short-lived warlords. The final Viking ruler of York bears a terrifying name that perfectly distills the brutality of his culture: Eric Bloodaxe. He rules through pure fear. But in 954, Eric is lured into a trap and slaughtered in the lonely bogs of Stainmoor. With his death, the Viking kingdom of York collapses, and the Anglo-Saxons briefly reclaim their broken frontier capital. For exactly 1 century, a fragile peace holds, but the year 1066 arrives to tear English history apart forever. In September, a massive fleet of 300 Norwegian longships arrive, determined to reclaim the Viking glory of Jorvik. The Anglo-Saxon king, Harold Godwinson, marches his army 200 miles north in just 4 days to meet them. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge, just outside York, the clash of steel is so devastating that only 24 Viking ships survive to return home. Harold celebrates his total victory in York, believing he has saved the north and secured his crown. But as he fastes, a breathless rider arrives with desperate news. William of Normandy has landed in the south with an invading army. Exhausted and bleeding, Harold's army marches all the way back, only to be annihilated at Hastings, where Harold dies with an arrow in his eye. William the Conqueror takes the throne, but the proud, independent citizens of York refuse to bow to a Norman tyrant. In 1068, William rides north and forces the city to build a massive timber castle on an ancient Roman mound. He leaves a brutal, heavily armed garrison inside, commanding them to hang anyone who speaks against the new king. The insult is too great. In 1069, the people of York rise up, open their gates to a Danish fleet, and storm the castle. They slaughter every single Norman soldier inside, burning the timber fortress to the ground in a night of chaotic fury. When news of the rebellion reaches William, his response is apocalyptic, triggering one of the darkest war crimes in British history. It is called the Harrying of the North, a deliberate, systematic campaign to turn the region into a dead zone. From the walls of York to the borders of Durham, William's soldiers march in a line, burning every farm, field, and village. They slaughter all livestock, smash food stores, and pour salt into the soil so nothing can ever grow again. It is the same instinct that once scratched a legion's name from Rome's records, only now turned on an entire county. Over 100,000 people starved to death, their unburied bodies rotting along the frozen, icy roads. Chroniclers of the time write that the famine is so total, desperate mothers are forced to eat the flesh of their own dead children. Yorkshire becomes an empty, silent wasteland, erased from the economic fabric of the kingdom for decades. William returns to the smoking ruins of York and orders the castle to be rebuilt, this time using permanent, impenetrable stone. He raises Clifford's tower high above the city, a brutal, brave fist of stone that sends a clear message to the survivors. Defy the absolute power of the Norman king, and your entire world will be turned to ash. Slowly and painfully, York rises from the ashes of William's apocalypse, rebuilt by the unstoppable power of the European wool trade. Wool is the finest in the known world, and York becomes the primary financial gateway for its processing and global export. Staggering wealth floods into the city, allowing York to buy its own self-governance and flex its muscles as an independent city-state. But in March 1190, a horrific explosion of violence carves a dark, permanent stain into the city's medieval history. As England prepares for the Third Crusade, a bloodthirsty, anti-Jewish mob turns on York's wealthy Jewish community. Terrified families flee to York Castle, seeking refuge inside the high wooden keep known today as Clifford's Tower. For days, the angry mob besieges the tower, screaming at the walls and demanding absolute conversion to Christianity or immediate death. On the night of March 16th, facing starvation or a brutal massacre, the trapped community chooses a terrifying path: mass suicide. Fathers killed their own wives and children and then set fire to the timber fortress, choosing death by their own hands over the mob. Over 150 Jews perish in the flames that night, leaving a legacy of profound shame that haunts York for centuries. Those few who survive the fire and surrender on the steps under the promise of mercy are instantly butchered by the crowd. Yet, the physical scale of the city continues to expand, and in 1220, construction begins on a monument to God. This is York Minster, a colossal Gothic cathedral designed with soaring pointed arches, stone vaults, and massive stained glass windows. The project is so monumental that it takes exactly 2.5 centuries of relentless, brutal labor to complete. When the cathedral is finally consecrated in 1472, it stands proudly as the largest Gothic cathedral in Northern Europe. But as the stone vaults reach toward heaven, the land below is torn apart by the bloodiest dynastic war in English history. This is the Wars of the Roses, a vicious family struggle between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. The city of York is at the absolute center of the conflict, proudly flying the banner of the White Rose from its battlements. King Richard III becomes York's champion and generous patron, bringing privileges and wealth to the northern capital. When Richard rides through these medieval streets, the crowds cheer for him as their true protector king. But on August 22, 1485, Richard is brutally cut down by Henry Tudor's forces at Bosworth Field. The last Yorkist king falls in the Leicestershire mud, and with him dies the city's golden age of royal favor. The victorious Tudor dynasty takes the throne, and they hold no love or special affection for the independent North. Instead, they bring a new, terrifying kind of warfare to the ancient walls, a war on faith itself. In 1536, the North erupts in the Pilgrimage of Grace, 40,000 people marching against the religious reforms of Henry VIII. They demand the preservation of the Catholic Church, but Henry crushes the rebellion with characteristic, merciless efficiency. In 1539, the Great Dissolution reaches York, tearing out the spiritual and economic heart of the city. St. Mary's Abbey, a monument that stood for centuries, is systematically stripped of its lead, gold, and sacred treasures. The Grand Abbey is abandoned and left to rot, transformed into a hollow, haunting stone skeleton inside the city center. The Catholic community is forced completely underground, practicing their forbidden faith in secret, dark rooms. Different century, different faith, same old tactic. Burn the evidence, and the truth becomes whatever the survivors dare to whisper. The narrow, overhanging street called the Shambles becomes a silent, deadly battleground for the royal spy networks. Originally a street of butcher shops where meat hooks still hang from wooden beams, it now hides dangerous secrets. Enter Margaret Clitherow, a butcher's wife living on the Shambles, who actively harbors hunted Catholic priests inside her home. She builds hidden rooms behind timber panels, risking her life so that forbidden masses can be whispered in the dark. In 1586, the royal authorities storm her house, discover the hiding places, and arrest Margaret for treason. When brought before the judges, Margaret stone-coldly refuses to enter any legal plea of guilty or not guilty. Under Tudor law, if a prisoner refuses to plead, their children cannot be tortured to testify, and their property cannot be seized. Her silence is a weapon to protect her family, but the legal punishment for refusing to plead is apocalyptic. It is called peine forte et dure, execution by brutal, systematic pressing to death. On Good Friday, they strip her naked, tie her to a stone floor, and lay a heavy wooden door on top of her body. Royal executioners begin piling massive stones onto the door, adding weight slowly, crushing her bones over agonizing hours. Margaret maintains absolute, deafening silence, protecting her children until her ribcage finally collapses beneath the weight. Today, she is a canonized saint, and her historic house on the Shambles stands as a silent shrine to a mother's ultimate sacrifice. The Reformation turns neighbor against neighbor, turning the proud northern capital into a city of dark paranoia and deep blood. In 1644, the horrors return as the English Civil War brings a massive parliamentary army to York's heavy stone gates. 20,000 men besiege the royalist city for 11 weeks, cutting off all food and leaving citizens to starve inside. Disease spreads through the cramped streets, and the sky glows red from constant artillery bombardments. The Royalists make a desperate, bloody attempt to break the siege at Marston Moor, just outside the city walls. They are completely annihilated, losing 4,000 men in a single, terrifying afternoon of absolute slaughter. York surrenders, its defenses broken, and its population exhausted by centuries of non-stop military, religious, and political warfare. The age of absolute monarchy is dying, and the scarred city desperately needs a period of long, uninterrupted peace. And finally, as the violent drama of previous centuries fades into the history books, the city begins to adapt. But before it can step into the modern world, the ancient capital will face a final, unexpected threat from within its own walls. A threat born not of kings or armies, but of pure religious madness. The 18th century brings a calmer, more fashionable rhythm, transforming York into a social hub for the wealthy Georgian gentry. In April 1739, thousands gather at Knavesmire to watch the public execution of the notorious highwayman Dick Turpin. The romantic legend of his single-night ride from London to York is pure fiction, invented by novelists decades later. In reality, he is a brutal horse thief and murderer, caught by accident and hanged for entertainment before bloodthirsty crowds. But inside the grand stone walls of York Minster, the threat shifts from criminal violence to religious madness. In February 1829, a fanatic named Jonathan Martin hides in the deep shadows as the evening service ends. He waits in absolute stillness until the priests leave. The heavy wooden doors slam shut, and silence settles over the cathedral. Believing that God has commanded him to burn the church down, he piles heavy cushions and wooden benches beneath the choir stalls. He sets them ablaze, and by the time anyone notices the smoke, massive flames are consuming the medieval timber roof. The minster burns through the night, reducing centuries of priceless craftsmanship and ancient wooden vaults into a mountain of ash. Martin is caught, declared completely insane, and locked away for life, while the city begins a massive reconstruction project. The ancient treasure is rebuilt more spectacular than before, but the year 108 AD tablet remains safe beneath the ruins. In 1839, the Industrial Revolution slams into the city walls with the grand arrival of the first steam railway. Enter George Hudson, a draper's son who rises through ruthless business acumen to become the undisputed railway king of England. Hudson builds a massive network of tracks, workshops, and warehouses, transforming York into the primary locomotive hub of the North. The population surges as thousands of workers pour in, and London is suddenly just 5 hours away instead of days. Middle-class Victorian families pour from the trains, eager to walk the medieval walls and see the Grand Minster. The ancient stronghold that spent 2 millennia making bloody history is now transforming into a peaceful museum to preserve it. But the 20th century brings an apocalyptic reminder that York can never truly escape the global theater of war. Hitler's bombers will try the same trick Rome once tried on the 9th Legion, Erase a place so completely its memory dies with its stones. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 29, 1942, the air raid sirens wail across the historic timber streets. Die Baedeker füllen der Black Sky, executing eine specialized und deeply cruel campaign, die Baedeker Raids. Named after the famous German tourist guidebook, Hitler orders his pilots to destroy Britain's most historic cultural treasures in revenge. York, with its medieval wooden houses, narrow lanes, and vulnerable cathedral, is chosen as the perfect, defenseless target. Waves of incendiary bombs rain down, designed to start unstoppable firestorms through the centuries-old architecture. The magnificent 15th-century Guildhall is struck directly, burning to the ground in a matter of minutes. Multiple incendiary bombs land directly on the grand roof of York Minster, threatening to reduce the cathedral to ash once more. But ordinary citizens, shopkeepers, and volunteer firefighters refuse to let the soul of their city die. Amidst falling high-explosive bombs, they scale the burning roof and put out the fires by hand, saving the Minster. When morning comes, 92 citizens are dead. Hundreds are homeless, and row after row of historic streets are smoking ruins. But the cathedral stands proud, a symbol of a city that has refused to die for 2,000 years. Decades later, the city takes its scars and transforms them into revolutionary historical education through the Jorvik Viking Center. Built directly above the 1970s Coppergate excavations, visitors ride through an accurate, physical reconstruction of 10th century North's streets. You can look at animatronic craftsmen, hear Old Norse dialogue, and literally smell the raw leather, wood smoke, and filth of the past. History here is no longer a sequence of dry text. It is something you can touch, smell, and experience. 2 millennia of absolute human experience stand compressed within this single, small square mile of northern stone. From the missing Roman 9th Legion to the ordinary heroes of the Blitz, the soil of York remembers everything. Hadrian tried to erase the deep failures of his empire, but history has a beautiful way of outliving its censors. The Roman finale here was the end of expansion for one massive global superpower. But across the world, at this exact moment in time, another great empire lost its eternity in a single night. Click on the video on your screen right now to discover the epic rise and fall of Babylon. Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the past. What got me about the 9th wasn't the ambush in the bog, it was the silence that came after it. 5,000 men gone, and Rome's answer wasn't grief. It was a stylus scratching a name off a tax roll. That's the part that stays with me. We like to think of history as a fixed record, dates carved in stone, unchangeable. But Eboracum's stone gate tells a different story. It was carved to last forever, and it still lied by omission the moment the legion vanished from every page that came after it. Every empire in this film tried the same trick at some point. Hadrian buried a legion. William tried to bury an entire people. The Reformation buried a faith in the walls of ordinary houses. Erase the failure, erase the enemy, erase the awkward truth, and hope the ground stays quiet. It never does. A tablet survives. A house on the shambles survives. A frozen Viking street under a car park survives. The archive can be edited. The soil keeps its own records, and eventually someone digs. So when I hear that a piece of history is settled, I've learned to ask what's missing from it. Chances are there's a legion buried in there somewhere, waiting for someone to notice the silence.